So good evening. Welcome to the next episode of Let's Talk About Mental Health. I'm Nels Kloster. I'm a psychiatrist working in Southern Vermont.
And my name is Robert Stack. I'm a drug and alcohol counselor and mental health counselor. Just a little word about the format. We've tried this thing with the phone call-in. We were still going to encourage people to make a phone call. Call us up and leave a message, but we're not going to do it live anymore. It just technically it hasn't worked well for us. So please, if you have a question and you see the phone number, call it, leave a question for us, and we'll get it. We'll answer it to the best of our abilities. The other thing is that we're going to start trying to do this show every Monday at this time, 6:30. And our hope is to sort of go back and forth between answering questions and maybe doing different topics and picking one topic and talking a little bit about it, whether it's about therapy or a type of mental illness or drug addiction, opiate addiction, alcoholism, whatever it might be. So if you have any suggestions or any ideas for these topics, again, use the phone, call that number, or send us a text. Thank you.
Yeah, and we really enjoyed the questions. They keep coming in with regularity. Yeah. And I guess on that note, we promised that we would follow up on a question from last week.
And to all 4 of our fans,
thank you very much. Yeah. And it's actually, the question that we stopped off with last time was, what is autism? And then I think there was also a follow-up question, and we got this last week that talked about autism didn't seem quite as common about 50 years ago. And what did we think about the sort of increase in the incidence of autism? And again, I feel like we're always making this sort of a warning that I'm not an expert in this, right? This is really an area for child psychiatrists and even pediatric neurologists as well. So, what I have to say about it is really more sort of academic and gotten from the books. But, autism is thought to be a disorder that presents itself or is recognizable in the very young. Before 3 years old is the criteria about diagnosing it. And the symptoms of it are into 3 separate groups or clusters. And one of them has to do with social interactions. People with autism don't pick up on social cues, and they don't seem to have the same sort of sense of connection with other people. Mm-hmm. So, for example, say a young child, there's holding the baby, they don't seem to interact in the same way. They don't seem to be to need that kind of connection. They don't make the same kind of eye contact. Cooing or interacting with mom is absent as well.
Is there any way to tell the difference, like babies are just naturally introverted? I mean, when you say that, I just wonder about that. I mean, is there, I don't want to alarm anybody. I mean, but there are babies that are more introverted than extroverted.
Yeah. So you're going to make me prove I don't know anything about this, right?
I'm just saying, you want to make that balance, right?
Right, and that's, you want, there are a number of things to look at. I mean, sort of the social interactions, the language skills. So there really is an in-depth workup to be done around autism.
By what age do you think people should be sort of noticing and asking for help?
I think a lot of people in hindsight would talk about in the infancy stage, and then certainly when you talk about kids starting to play with other kids, parallel play, which is sort of being wrapped up in your own toys and doing what you're doing, and then eventually doing that with other kids, and then the sharing that happens, and you find that these children are not meeting those social developmental landmarks. Another set of symptoms as well is around language. So the very severe end of the spectrum with autism, you'll find children with a great deficit. They don't develop coherent language. And then at a less severe end of the spectrum, there's better language skills, but there's often sort of an odd choice of words, not quite getting the meanings of say, slang, for example, vernacular, and sort of idiosyncratic speech. Mm-hmm. And then the third area is around movement. So you'll find that children with autism engage in non-functional types of movement. So it might be rocking and fidgeting, spinning around, playing with certain objects in a certain way. is just unusual.
Okay.
And, good news around this is the treatment is not so much around medications. With Asperger's, there's no, like with many psychiatric disorders, there's not a particular medication, say, that can be prescribed for autism or Asperger's, but it's not unusual for there to be problems with aggression or violence, in which case you want sort of a tranquilizing medication, or even problems with obsessiveness or sadness, over a long time, depression, that would then respond to antidepressant medications. But I think a lot of the work that gets done is around integrated schools that do more than just sort of, education around it, but a curriculum also includes the social interactions and sort of very high staff to student ratio to then get these children to the point of understanding social cues, recognize them, and even if they don't actually sort of understand or feel that, to be able to go through the motions so that hopefully children will eventually become mainstreamed in the school and not be that odd child that sits in a corner. Be able to, eventually maybe even live on their own or live in supportive housing. Things we take for granted, like being able to drive and not get into accidents, and then sort of function more closely to independently.
Yeah, and I think it goes to one of the things that we talked about when we started this show, is about the stigma sometimes of mental illness, where people don't go get help. Right. And I'm of a generation sometimes where you say, well, kids are kids and they'll grow up and they'll grow out of it, don't worry about it. And that's true for 80% maybe, I don't know, pick a number. But for some of them, it's not true necessarily. And one of my grandsons wasn't picking up words very well. I mean, it was, he did, and there was some concern. His parents were concerned, and he went to Winston Prouty Center here in town, and they were very helpful. Yeah. And his words are fine now. Now, I guess on one hand you could say, well, he would have been fine anyway. Well, I don't know that. I mean, I think that didn't hurt. He went, he saw him, they gave him some help, they gave him some classes. I thought it was really reassuring. So, if you don't mind, I mean, the same thing with autism. I think there's. You'll hear this sometimes. It's a, I hate to use the word, but it's not like an oddness, but there's something a little different. They don't seem to be quite the same. And it's so hard as a parent sometimes. You love them, and you love who they are and what they do. But I think at some point you might realize, maybe there's something going on here. Yeah, why don't we ask? Why don't we ask the doctor, a family doctor, or like you say, go see a specialist. But don't be afraid to ask. Well,
I think you're afraid to ask because a lot of times we're afraid of what the answer is going to be.
Well, the answer is better than the unknown. The answer is better than not doing anything most of the time. I was reading an article about the children actually do get better with Asperger's, and they were talking about their success, but it takes work. It takes therapy.
It takes a lot of work.
And also you want to value them as children, and they do have skills, and they may not be very good personally, but I'm not either. I mean, so I mean, it's just, I mean, I don't know.
Well, there's a very, very famous case. There's actually a movie about her. Temple Grandin has autism and understood cows.
Well,
and so she was brought in eventually when she sort of gained credibility to redesign the whole sort of slaughter process around how cows were brought from the stockyards then into the slaughterhouse, and was able to develop that in a way, understanding cows, it was much less traumatizing to them and led to much less, say loss by sort of panicking and stampeding in the corrals.
But it wasn't just cows, you understand systems.
And systems too.
I mean, really, you know what I mean? It wasn't just that, oh, she's a big fan of cows. I mean, no. I mean, she watched it and said, this could be done a better way. Yeah. And I think there's children out there that, they instinctively know how to fix a radio or do this or do that. And, they have skills. Yeah. The other thing I just mentioned, and this is a little bit off topic, but I was reading an article in the Wall Street Journal, and they were talking about the problem with vaccinations. And at one point, some people had made a conclusion that some of the older vaccinations had mercury or some trace element of it in there, and it was causing autism. And there's been no scientific proof of that, but it was out there long enough with enough questions and enough causation gets kind of iffy. Well, you have this and then you have this, and I think they're connected. But let me just say that the article in the Wall Street Journal said this is really a failure of public relations of the medical field. That vaccinations have been incredibly successful. They're like one of the most wonderful things that we've been able to do to help childhood disease and illnesses. And loving, caring mothers are sort of worried about the vaccination rather than recognizing that the problem really is if you don't get them vaccinated, whether it be whooping cough or whatever it might be. I mean, and again, this article just made the point that on some level, all the negative publicity against it, they didn't sufficiently react to that. They didn't get out there and say, well, wait a minute, this is not just a scare tactic. People who love their children are worried about vaccinations. And, we need to do a better job of telling people, no, they're safe. And not only are they safe, but they're crucial. They're important.
And for some reason, we're not been convincing about the science behind this.
Right, exactly.
And so whatever that gulf is, it's very important, because one of the properties that's very important for vaccinations to actually work is this thing called herd immunity, that enough of us have to be vaccinated in order to protect us as a whole. Right. So I think we saw that around the chicken, it wasn't chicken pox, the more recent vaccination. It wasn't taking hold. People were not engaged in that, and weren't enough people actually getting that vaccine for it to have any kind of chance of being effective.
Right. And last but not least, and I mentioned, I think last week, some of the Asperger's, but you and I were talking about it before the show. They have a new DSM manual that we use for diagnosis, and their Asperger's, I understand, is going to be part of autism, and they're going to talk about a whole spectrum.
Right.
So maybe they'll have a different way of talking about this and diagnosing it and identifying it. So that's probably in our future.
Right, yeah.
Okay.
It sort of answers the question of how do you diagnose something, what is it? Right. And it's a moving target. And this book has changed over time.
So anybody who's an expert in autism, if we've misspoke, our apologies, but we think
text us or email us to set us straight. We'll be very happy for that. All right. So how do you handle your clients who do not follow your recommendations? Well, as if that was a very unusual thing to happen, huh?
Well, I don't know. I've given up handling clients a long time ago, quite frankly. I think it works best when it becomes their decision. I mean, someone tells you what to do, and some of this comes up with the motivational interviewing and some of the techniques of counseling. But if I make a suggestion, and the suggestion is before somebody's ready to do it, they'll defend the status quo, and they'll tell you why they're not going to do it. As long as it's your idea, I think there's a certain resistance, almost built-in resistance. And so, if sometimes in my interviews, and I would ask a client if they wanted my 2 cents. No, I mean it. I would sort of say, like, do you want to hear what I suggest? And, almost all the time they would say yes. I mean, probably just to be polite. Right. Occasionally they would sort of indicate no, but almost always. But I would always frame it that way, that this is just, this is my knowledge, this is my experience, and here's like a recommendation, here's some recommendations. And I always try to frame it in this idea that, well, plan A is your plan, and that's the plan, is the plan that you're willing to do. And
we'll work along with that together, see where it goes.
Let me offer you plan B and C. Put them on the list and take them under consideration. I mean, let's go with your plan, but, from my perspective, 99% of the people, here's sort of what I would expect, here's what I would recommend, but, who knows?
I think we're at a time, and I know sometimes when I'm working with somebody, every sort of, my 2 cents is always countered with the reason why it's not true.
Yeah.
Oh, no, that's not it because of whatever. I'm like, okay, you know what, I'm completely missing right here. I'm not in sync with this person at all. And I think these days people expect to have more to say in everything, including in medical care. And so, I came to this a little bit later. I didn't go straight from college into medical school, so I had some real world experience, and I saw a lot of what we were doing in medicine as really so consultative work. You know, I have this experience. I mean, much like you might call a carpenter or plumber in your home, and they might have something that they want done around medications or what they think is going on, and I might disagree with them. And then it sort of gets into this conversation like you would with your carpenter. Well, I want this addition done in this kind of way. And he might say, yeah, okay, we can do that. He might say, are you crazy? That kind of goes against the rules, and it won't stand up, and I can't do that. So I often find myself in a position where I hear what you're saying, and I know that's what you want, but you know what? I don't think it's the right thing, and I can't go with that. I can't help this, but I'm still willing to see you. We'll still work this out, and we'll see what happens. I don't... That's right. You just stop taking it personally after a while.
That's right.
You keep working with people, and you understand. Well, okay, maybe we'll get to Plan B. We'll get to Plan C.
That's right.
It's a long-term relationship.
Same thing. Once or twice I talk about like a plumbing or whatever, but yeah, same idea. You know. Well, we'll do it your way, but if it doesn't work, you know, we're going to come back. It's going to cost you more.
Yeah. We're going to have a lot more work to do.
We have a lot more work, point, you know. But we'll see. We'll do it your way. Yeah. But normally it flows downhill.
Well,
we don't want to pump it up.
I'm reminded here too is for all those pharmaceutical advertisements on TV. You know, I'm amazed that anybody even comes in to the doctor and says, "Hey, can I have this thing with Lunesta? I heard that I'll sleep like a butterfly, but I also might die." Right, with all this sort of list of side effects.
That's right.
But one thing that we've noticed is that even if you come in saying, hey, I saw this commercial for this medication, even if I don't agree that's sort of the right treatment or the right recommendation, it gets us talking about something about the whole situation that made you think that might be a good treatment for you. And we're able to sort of have that evolve then towards something that actually does meet that person's needs, and maybe we'll find some recommendation that they actually will, you know, like to follow from us.
And just to finish what you were saying, but also in that, at some point you have to acknowledge as a therapist or a counselor that the therapy is not successful, it's not working.
Yeah.
And you need to terminate or make a referral. I mean, and you know, because you have to be so careful about personal, you know, transference. You know, if someone's not listening to you, none of us like that.
No.
You know, when someone's arguing, well, I suggested this, and it gets so confusing. I think at some point, if you're working with somebody, and I really can't say that I've had this personal experience because I worked so much on an inpatient unit. Mm-hmm. But on some level, you sort of say, you know, I don't know if I'm very helpful to you. Yeah. You know what I mean? You know, here's what I thought. Here's what I suggested. Mm-hmm. I don't know if that's working. I don't know. I guess on some level, when they disagree with you, that gives you something to work with.
Right.
But I also would say at some point, I mean, if at all possible, you might recognize that, you know, I'm on dangerous ground, but maybe it's just not working at this time, this talk therapy.
Yeah. And often when I'm first meeting people, I'll ask about sort of what their history has been in the past of various treatments and who they've worked with, what the diagnoses have been, and whether it sort of whether it resonated with them, whether it rung true with them, and whether it was helpful, it was done. So in a way, looking at past failures or lacks of success, and maybe why they didn't follow recommendations, why they did follow recommendations, and using that as a stepping stone to what we're going to do then,
right?
To try to find the right thing.
And I've often, you know, I've worked with clients who were there based on their lawyer's recommendation. Yeah. And no, really, on some level, they're taking their recommendation, but they're not there for therapy. Yeah. They're there for other goals. Right. And so a lot of times my recommendations are sort of therapeutic interventions, and they're sort of like, well, that's a nice idea.
Nice, yeah. which it's a failure to line up with that, right?
That's right.
I mean, so often, especially having worked, you know, inpatient units together,
right.
You know, we find often somebody will come in and everybody's looking, saying, "Oh, you got a drug problem," and the person will sort of acknowledge that superficially. Yeah, I got a drug problem. I violated the conditions of my parole, and I was either go back to jail, go to treatment, and this and that. And what they're really thinking is not that I have a drug problem. I have a parole officer problem.
That's right.
He keeps testing my urine, I keep showing up drugs, and he keeps sending me to jail. So then it becomes a more genuine conversation, at least from our point of perspective, is, okay, let's explore this parole officer problem that you have. In the hopes then that's a stage right now, so maybe we can progress to then talking about, okay, maybe I got a drug problem too.
Yeah. I thought you were going to say, in their head they're saying, yeah, I got a drug problem, I can't get enough.
Right, I can't. And my parole officer keeps getting in the way and sending me to jail.
It's too hard to get, it's very expensive. Anyway.
So it's hard, it's work, and it's never obvious. It's never obvious. So another one, so I'm 23 years old and a lesbian with a very supportive family and a good job. I'm responsible. I don't drive when drinking, and have never blacked out or gotten sick. I really love the taste and variety of beers and hope to make my own home brew someday. There's alcoholism in my family. My dad is recovering, and both my grandparents on my mother's side were alcoholics. Recently, I noticed that my drinking has gone from want to drink to need to drink. Is this a problem? Wow.
Well, I would say yes. I mean, and the reason I say that is that by the time you're saying you need a drink or a drug, that's basically how you give yourself permission to use.
Yeah.
And because who would deny me my needs? It's one thing to say, well, I want a drink. Well, I want a lot of things. I want money, I want a car, I want but you realize, well, it's just a want. But a need has its own, like, an imperative.
I need food, I need housing.
And not only that, you'll find drug addicts sometimes, and I don't mean this in a mean way, but sometimes they almost defend some of their behaviors by saying, look, it's not personal when I steal or I do something like that. I just really need the drug because I'll be sick without it. And I don't think you have a right to make me this sick when all I need is a few bucks to feel better.
Yeah.
And so the change from want to need, and actually when I worked with in a cognitive class sometimes with patients, I would say I want to change the verb the other way. I want you to stop using the word need and go back to using the word want, because again, a want is negotiable. A need, if you ever hear somebody said, "I just needed to do that," that's the end of the argument.
Right.
I mean, you know what I mean? That's the end. When I was first reading this, and the supportive family, the good job, I enjoy the beer. I like to make my home brew. All that sounded fine.
It sounded good, didn't it?
It sounded good. And they could have stopped with that paragraph, and I would have said, well, that's fine. Give it a shot. If you enjoy it and you want to do that, okay. But then she goes on to say, I have alcoholism in my family. Well, there's a very strong case for genetic markers, if you will, for alcoholism. One of them being tolerance. I mean, it's just amazing how children of alcoholic parents and grandparents sometimes, from the moment they begin to drink, they can drink more than their peers.
It takes more to get the same effect.
And it takes more to get the same effect, and they drink safely. And there's been some excellent studies. So, if you have alcoholism in your family and your grandparents, I mean, my number one suggestion would be don't drink. I mean, don't even... I know that sounds horrible. It sounds terrible. But, I grew up in Irish Catholic culture, and there was very few social drinkers. There were drinkers and there were teetotalers.
So one end or the other, right?
Now, I know, but some Irishers will complain about that. Yes, it's true. There are some Irish that drink socially. Okay?
You don't know them, though.
Yeah. I've never met them. That's right. I don't know. But I'm sure there are. But by and large, people sort of knew the difference between, I'm at risk for this, and I need to not drink. And I've seen the damage that it does to the family and to our family, and I choose not to drink. So I think it's... if the person is listening, I most definitely it's a problem. Yeah. I mean, I don't know how often you need to drink, or what do you drink when you do drink.
Or what qualifies as needing to drink.
Right, and what are the consequences at this point? I'm not, I can only imagine. I mean, if you won't go home at the end of the day and lock the door and don't drive, and what you need to have is one beer or one drink. I'm not going to argue with you or make a diagnosis, but if you find that when you start to drink, you continue to drink, and that your need to drink is to drink more and to drink more often, I read somewhere one time, I think it was in AA literature or somewhere, but it basically said a lot of alcoholics could probably stop drinking before it became a problem if they wanted to.
They wanted to.
But the problem is that many of them at that point don't want to stop. I mean, they haven't suffered any consequences. They still enjoy it. They're still having a good time with it. And, by the time they get around to, saying, I need to stop, but that's when they find out that they can't. So I think this person, just by the sheer fact that they're asking about it, I think they're already aware that they do have a problem.
And it's the nature versus nurture argument, right? Which now we talk about sort of genes and environment, but it's the same thing. Am I born this way because of my heredity, my family, the genes that I've inherited, or is it my environment then that because I'm around drinkers all the time, that's why I drink? When you look at these with even more recent research, it comes down to about a 50-50 combination. So, 50% of alcoholism can be attributed to the genes versus 50% attributed to the environment. And what I think really kind of bringing that point home, I read a book called The Recovery Book, and I forget whether the guy's name was Mooney or Moody, who's a physician who works at an addiction center. Very strong family history of alcoholism. He decided not to ever drink. And people in treatment always want to know, you're an addict too, or you're an alcoholic as well. And his answer to them, since he never had a drink, was, well, not yet. Not yet.
Right.
Because he wasn't even going to take that chance, given his very strong family history of putting gas near that fire.
Yeah, and last but not least, and I just mentioned, she mentions her dad's a recovering alcoholic. I don't know if she grew up with him and was in the same house with him, and whether there's some other dynamic there about like, well, here's how you're supposed to drink, control drinking or enjoy drinking. I'm not sure about that. But again, I would sort of look at that and sort of wonder, like, why the fascination with it? Here I have a parent that's an alcoholic, and I'm sure it affected her life. Why do I think I would be immune to it, or why would I want to do it? And again, I think that speaks to the power of the drug, quite frankly. I really wish people understood that alcohol is a drug. It's a sedative. And it's as addicting as any other drug and as harmful as any other drug. Anyway.
I don't know how much time to say this, but alcohol is a drug. Alcoholism is addiction. Addiction is a mental illness, and that it's really even more stigmatizing and artificial to try to make a designation between these, that somehow one is lesser or different than the other, when these all sort of meet the criteria of causing distress and dysfunction in one's life.
And we consider it an illness, and when you get to that point where it's really a problem in your life, it's causing a problem with other people, and you find that you're unable to stop or regulate your intake. And I think for some people by that time it's no longer voluntary, and they find that they can't stop or stay stopped.
Right, the control is shifted.
And the time to stop is when you begin, and that's the best time. So we're running down on time.
So here's a question that seems like a perfect lead into what we want to talk about next week, as we talk about having sort of themes to various episodes. So I'd like to go back to a topic you spoke on a few weeks back, marijuana. You both said you were against the decriminalization of pot. Do you mean even medicinal pot? And what about Marinol? Well, I could, ask anybody who in our households. We could go on and on and on about this without a problem.
Yeah, and I think that we have to say right up front that we both of us have worked together on an inpatient unit. We have seen the worst of addiction and the harm that it has done to families and children and grandparents and legal problems, money. And, to view any drug, I mean this, any drug as sort of innocuously is very hard to do. And I know that some people just like chase me down the street, but many and many of the people that I work with started with marijuana, and they did, and for different people, taking a drug from the outside to make themselves feel better is really the beginning of their troubles. Go ahead.
And I think part of this, a big piece of this, is that there's a change in perception for how serious a substance that it can be, and particularly as we're concerned about how that impacts the most vulnerable people out there.
And we'll answer this next week.
Thanks so much.